I can ask specific questions. Yeah. I mostly
Okay.
want to hear from you, but I guess the first question would just be to share a little bit about your experience in Nordoff Robbins, because I was so excited the first time I chatted with you and realized that we had Clive in common.
Right.
And yeah, I'd love to
Yeah.
just hear a little
Yeah.
bit about that.
It's funny because I was just telling this story in a leadership workshop in the last week or so, talking about how we often come to things as a reaction to something we don't want. I had, an existential crisis at the age of 19 or 20 and had sold everything I owned and traveled around the country and ended up back in Cincinnati at an old teacher's home and visiting with him. And was my plan was to go back to the University of Cincinnati or the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music and try to get in there. And I got a call from the principal of a special ed school up in Xenia, Ohio, that I had interviewed for 9 months prior. And she begged me to come and just be an assistant teacher. And so I went up, and that started a whole new journey in my life. While I was there, I started to get really interested in music therapy. And I got interested in seeing what other people were doing and watching, what I could in the way of videos way back then and so on. And I was so disappointed. I was so deeply disappointed with it. It felt like happy music hour at the old folks home, and various versions of that. And so I started digging around, and I came across the big creative music therapy book by Nordoff and Robbins. And it came with the tape, the cassette tape back in those days of their work with different kids. And I was smitten. I was just like, that's what I want to do. And I actually talked my the principal in the second year into letting me use half of my time there to create a music program at the school. Didn't know what the hell I was doing except to model, what I was hearing on the tapes and reading about, and as best I could. And that led to my journey back to school to get my degree in music therapy. Couldn't find any place. I don't remember whether I couldn't find any place or couldn't find any place that was suitable for me that did training in Nordoff and Robbins. So I ended up at the University of Wisconsin in Oshkosh. Did the rest of my degree in the next 2.5 years, and went to Wasatch Developmental Center, which was the only internship in the country that focused on Nordoff and Robbins. And that was phenomenal. 6 months living right on the grounds of a big old awful institution, and with six other interns and staff that was phenomenal. And that that work of meeting people right where they were and incorporating their breathing, incorporating the tonality of their screams or their cries, incorporating the rhythms and pace of their movement. All of that was just extraordinary to me. And the results in which kids, adults at Wasaic, who had never really communicated before, beginning to engage in relationship, and who had never spoken before, begin to incorporate language. And of course, seeing the innate musicality of folks who were blind, deaf, autistic, institutionalized for all their lives. All of that was just extraordinary. Yeah.
I was on mute, sorry. But I was nodding along. Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm finding one thing I'm interested in talking to people that studied sort of this improvisational model is I found it hard to, or I still find it hard to incorporate that beautiful work and those magical moments into the structure that we are offered in our society and especially this state, um, in sort of school-based settings or hospital settings where you're expected to bill for your time and do that based on like certain goals that are being met. And I just wonder if you ran into that in some of your work too.
Sure. I mean, the biggest barrier was space, both physical space, square footage, but sound space, where we could engage in going wherever that child or person needed to go, which was sometimes loud and boisterous and meant drums banging and loud piano playing and all of that kind of stuff. It was often very difficult to find places where that space was available. It took somebody in a leadership role who had a vision for it, who understood what we're trying to do, and so on. On the sort of goals and objectives, that linear kind of model, I just I treated it like learning to speaking two languages and interpreting one for the other. So I would learn to speak the language of the psychologist, the behavioral specialist, the EIP, yeah, those different kinds of things. I would speak that language, and then I'd go back and do my work. And I knew that all I needed to be able to do at the end of the day was show results. So if I got the outcomes or exceeded those outcomes, or got completely different outcomes, but they were so extraordinary that nobody could ignore them, which was often the case, I'd say, well, we're going to work on this. And then when we came to reporting time, I'd report, well, we didn't make much progress on this, but we're seeing language for the first time. They would be like, well, okay. With practice, you sort of got the reputation for being able to get those outcomes.
Yeah.
And
It just,
I remember being at I may have told you this story before, being at the Cerebral Palsy Center in Roosevelt, New York, biggest cerebral palsy center in the country, at least back then. And learning when I got hired, I think it was in the late summer as a senior therapist, that I was in charge of the Christmas show. 75 adults in all manner of wheelchairs and communication boards and all of that. And then I learned that what that had entailed in the past was jingly bells on their heads and stuff like that. And set about having them craft a story that could be built into a sort of oratorio, and orchestrating it for their specific abilities and all of that. That, while not the clinical music therapy that I love to do, people walked away from that going, oh, this is something altogether different from what we've seen before. Yeah.
I love that. Just meeting people where they are and finding what they can do, like letting
Right.
them show that off.
Right.
It is amazing sometimes seeing like which staff or sometimes even family members just weren't even aware that people were able to do what they're able to do.
Right.
So that ties into my last question for you, actually, which is now you have this incredible coaching business, with a great website and lots of content and like interaction. And I just wonder, um, I just imagine that a lot of your work as a music therapist and a musician plays into being able to coach people on leadership. And I wonder if you want to just share a little bit about your business now and whether some of the same sort of tenets of improvisation kind of play into your leadership work.
Right. It plays in two or three ways. One is just that I had somebody say to me, for years I was a choir director, about 20 years in various places, and somebody who knew me in that mode and then experienced me in a whole different setting in social services was like, you're still conducting all the time, aren't you? This is all just a piece of music to be put together, taken apart and put together. And I was like, yeah, I think in those terms. So that's one piece of it. Um, the second piece of it, so it's sort of second layer out, is similar to that. Find the reason I found Nordoff and Robbins, which was what I saw sucked. And I was like, if this isn't going to be truly inspired, if this isn't going to change lives, why bother? I'll go do something else. And in my work with teachers for years, in my work with teenagers for years, and everything I've done, I've had that kind of perspective. If it's not truly inspired, if we're not really doing something here, to move on and find something else to do. And so, the center I've just created online is the Center for Inspired Leadership, which is in part built on that idea. But through all the different things I've done, working with teens, working with teachers, working with social workers, coaching people on their personal lives, and now the leadership work, it's all been one big improvisation. The training, for example, around being a life coach or an executive coach is very linear. You have these workshops, worksheets that people fill out, and you set their goals, and you're helping them work through. And it's very linear. And I don't do any of that. I have no interest. I'm like, if that's what you want, there are lots of other folks out there to do it. And even people I've worked with for some time, they'll come on and they'll say, I don't know where I need to start today. And I have not once in 40 years ever had somebody not get to the end of the session and go, how do we always get exactly where I need to go? We always find our way to the topic or the issue that is most important to me, which is not at all unlike the Nordoff Robbins work with kids, where you just started where they were and you ended up finding yourself right exactly where you needed to be. And as people are learning about how to be effective, inspired leaders, my message is, you better expect that this is just one big improvisation. And like a jazz master who knows that home tonality, who knows the tune inside and out, who knows the chord structure like the back of their hand. That's there. That's the thing, being solidly rooted in that. That allows them to wander off into the atmosphere and explore all kinds of other things and always be able to return back home. And so, for leaders, when they can do that, when they're solid in the sort of core principles that guide them, if they're really solid in their vision for what it is they're trying to create, that's worth creating, that's compelling and contagious. And that's part of that message, too, is if you haven't got a vision that's contagious, you got nothing, because you can't do this alone, right? And you got to be able to articulate this in a way that's compelling and contagious. If you're solid in those sort of core things, then the rest of it is a ride. And even when I'm talking about what the aim is, I use the analogy of a dog hanging its head out the window at 60 miles an hour. And you go, why does a dog do that when it knows from past experience that it's going to get bugs in its teeth? And the answer is because the thrill of the ride is worth the bugs in the teeth. And the goal of the of brilliant, inspired leadership is not that everything works perfectly. It is that people are willing to ride out the rough spots because the thrill of achieving that vision is worth the ride.
Worth the bugs in their teeth.
Worth the bugs in their teeth.
I
Absolutely.
love that.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, this has been short but so sweet, and it's such an honor to talk with you. And I just really appreciate hearing your perspective every time we chat. And now I'm excited to get to share it with other people. So
Excellent.
thank you so much.